A very good morning, everyone. Welcome to EU referendum day. The day has arrived. So this is going to be the last time, hopefully, once it's put to bed, that I get to mention this situation. But what I want to do is, ultimately, it's going to be the big focus today, going in through the evening and then tomorrow morning for the entire global market. So I am going to very much focus on kind of putting the picture together, where we are, state of play, how the market might move, trading the night itself, and thereafter. And we have already had a couple of data points this morning, though, just so you're aware of. The French manufacturing PMIs come in slightly weaker than expected, actually a 16-month low there, so Bund futures have managed to claw back the actual gap lower. We've now closed that gap trading 164.57. The German manufacturing PMI was actually a touch better than expected. So slightly mixed data, but France in particular pretty poor. Moving on then to the pound here on my chart, you can see a big gap up last night at the reopening of electronic trade. 4 polls we had yesterday, heading in towards the actual vote itself. So just recapping the opinion released their last poll, which was online, showing Leave 1% in the lead. We also had a TNS poll online as well, which showed Leave 2% in the lead, 43 to 41. However, after the US closed, so this was at 10 p.m. last night, and if you remember with your sterling futures, that's when they closed for an hour between 10 and 11, hence the gap up. That came because the Comres poll showed a 6% lead for Remain, but after accounting for the don't knows, that extended to 8% lead for the Remain at 54 to 46. That's one of the largest gaps that we've seen to the Remain side in quite some time. The YouGov online poll for the Times also came in and showed Remain 2% in the lead, which meant that the FT's poll of polls, which kind of is a composite of all of them, is now sitting at 47 to 45 in favour of Remain, and that takes into account those last 4 polls. So hence the reason you've had this kind of risk-on sentiment that was observed overnight trade, the gap up in sterling futures, positive sentiment with the higher moves in equities as Asia traded higher, as the market seemingly continues to price in, at this point, a higher likelihood of Remain. Now, one of the things that I shared with you earlier in the week, which I think is worth looking at again, is a couple of charts out of the Deutsche Bank notes. Just bear with me. So this one in particular is looking at history and looking at the opinion poll trends for Quebec, Scottish and the UK referendums. So the point being is that statistically, looking at the red line, Quebec and Scottish referendum, the polls were particularly inaccurate on those political votes that took place. In this instance, there was a 6-point, roughly, swing between what the polls were saying and then actually what the vote itself came out as. On both occasions, there's been a 6-point swing back to Remain. A lot of this might be due to the general kind of on-the-day vote. Again, people, when they're put in the polling booth, under pressure, especially those undecided, tend to err with the side of continuity, and that has been the case in these last 2 events. If you look at where we currently reside on the dotted line for the UK referendum, if there's a 6-point swing, then we're clearly for Remain, going on this basis alone. And this might go some way then to explain why the market has been pricing the way it has. If I go back to this sterling chart, these are year-to-date highs that we're now trading at. And if you look at William Hill this morning, they have Remain favourite at 81%. But the polls, it's only a 2 percentage point lead. One thing to be very mindful of, though, with the bookies is, although they seem to be more aligned with the way that the market's pricing, because the market, the way that the assets have been moving, is certainly favourable for us to Remain this evening or overnight. But there should be some caution, because betting odds reflect the weight of the money staked rather than a prediction. And looking at some of the breakdowns, even if you just go on a single bet basis, it tends to be the ladies pulling in the big punches for the betting scene. Because there was a woman in London with William Hill that staked £100,000 for Remain, whereas on the Leaf side, another lady has placed the biggest bet is only £10,000. So real big money has definitely been going into the Remain side, which is obviously going to influence the amount of money staked, and therefore the percentage net as a result should be higher. So that is worth taking that into account. But I do know, speaking to Bill about this, is that possibly though the real money, i.e. the large hedge funds and so forth, have they already kind of made their mind up with what they've seen, the information they've obtained, and it's already been baked into the price, and hence the reason why those odds are out of line with the actual polling estimates. So a couple of things there to bear in mind. Another thing as well, from a weather perspective, obviously you all would have seen, certainly in London, the thunder and lightning last night. I think the entire tube network was delayed this morning. I know on my way in on the Northern Line, Tooting and Balham were underwater and the train didn't even stop. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because turnout is a really big factor in these situations, whether a referendum on independence or a general election. And the reason why is because Leave vote appears at this point, at least in the campaigning, to be the more passionate, and likelihood then they'll be more incentivised to vote. So a low turnout could well be more favourable for a Leave. So people like me will be hoping the sun shines and we can all get down the polling booth and vote Remain, but that's besides the point. Other things then to look at are, if we just look at the actual night itself and how it's going to unfold. From what I've heard, there is due to be an Ipsos Mori poll at some point today. I was actually under the impression that they weren't allowed to do any kind of polling on the day, but it seems that this poll that's going to be released is actually dated from a few days ago when the survey was actually taken, so that kind of explains it. Apparently as well, though, although there's no official exit poll by the Electoral Commission, there is a poll from YouGov which is going to come out shortly after 10 o'clock as well. What I'm showing with you here is a chart of the timing of the area of announcements. Now this is really important because, for one thing, if you read the blog that I wrote a few weeks ago, is, as I say, there's no official exit poll, and that was really the game changer when it came to the last general election. It was over and done with as soon as that exit poll came out, because very surprisingly there was an overall majority to the Conservatives when nearly everyone was expecting a very close race. So at that point the market factored in the new information, and then the actual constituents' results coming in was all just a formality of the overnight trading or hours. In terms of this time round, the actual first result should start coming in at around 12:30, so just after midnight. But looking at this chart, you can see that the cumulative amount, we should have roughly 50% by kind of 3:30. I would imagine definitely by 4 we should know exactly what the outcome is going to be, unless it's extremely tight run race. But on the value of probabilities, I would say by 3:30 this morning we'll probably already know the result, whether we're in or out of the EU at that point. The rest is a formality. The official result then comes out, I think I get announced in Manchester at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. As I mentioned before, Ben is going to be on Hotcom for the early hours of this morning, so if you want to tune in from home, please do. You can access your charts on the systems, I believe. Otherwise, Will and I will be in from around 6 a.m. tomorrow. As you've already heard as well, much of the movement is probably going to happen overnight. If any of the live guys are going to be trading the event, again, really you're going to have to pull an all-nighter, because most of the investment banks and funds are fully staffing their FX desks. That means a lot of the volume on the institutional side as well, and even in the States and Singapore, I've heard their desks are also going to be open. Everyone's covering it as if it's a fully stocked normal trading hours. So you're going to get a bulk of that price movement during that midnight to 3 a.m. point is going to be critical. The other timing point to be aware of as well is 10 p.m. when the polls close, because there's lots of privately commissioned exit polls being conducted by hedge funds. You've probably read this in the newspaper. They've been paying up big money to conduct their own polls so they can essentially have some inside information to front run the actual market activity possibly, or at least position themselves correctly if there is to be an outright direction, whether leave or remain. They'll certainly be ahead of the game. With that being said, I would definitely start to keep an eye on the pound during the latter part of today. I would imagine most people, I would say, who if they're voting on the day, tend to vote after work. So my logic being then that most of the votes will come in between 6 and 7. So if I was a hedge fund doing exit polls, I'd probably have a pretty good insight by around 8 p.m. And obviously we're not going to hear anything, but I'd just be interested to see sterling movement in the FX markets around 8, 9 o'clock, once the hedge funds, I think, will have a better insight to what we might see. Any erratic price move in either direction might kind of give the game away and how they're positioned on the information that they have. Just looking at a couple of other more historical things to look at. We've talked about the fact that sterling, it's off a little bit from the initial highs, but we have traded year-to-date highs in the last, 10 hours. If you're looking at history and market pricing at the moment, we are certainly priced to remain as far as the pound is considered. But arguably then the biggest move is going to come if we have a vote to leave. That could provide, from a purely objective trading point of view, the best opportunity for you guys. Looking on this chart that I saw on Bloomberg this morning, they were talking about some of the big moves that we've seen. This was the sterling dropping to lowest since 1985. This obviously was the Lehman Brothers in the subprime crisis at its most ferocious. And you can see though the pound tumbled more than 30% at the height of the financial crisis. You can then see the fall in the green dot from the Scottish referendum. If I was to go back up to this one, this is when sterling fell 30% in 5 months on the ERM crisis. A lot of you guys might be not old enough to remember excuse me, the ERM crisis. So what that essentially was Black Wednesday, September 1992. The British Conservative government was forced to withdraw the pound sterling from the European exchange rate mechanism, the ERM. That's because it was unable to keep the pound above its agreed lower limit in the ERM. When you talk about George Soros, that famous investor, the reason why he's such high profile is that he made over £1 billion in profit from shorting the pound. That's where you have this story about he broke the Bank of England. So in context then, you've had a lot of these investment banks talking about 10%, 15%. I've seen people talk as much as 20% falls ultimately we could see in the pound. And from a trading point of view, that's going to be a much more stronger conviction in that move. And although it's going to be a wild ride to get there, it's certainly going to be probably a more possibly easier scenario to execute than this relief rally we might see, given the relief side to be up in cable is going to be more limited from where we are priced at the moment. Going on to the actual night itself, and a couple of things that I'll share this link with you. I saw a pretty good wrap up by the City AM yesterday. Some tables that are going to be extremely useful for when you're trading overnight. First of all, there are different ways of looking at different regions. Now, If you read my blog, Sunderland's one of the biggest areas to report early on. They're important because they're a Leave stronghold, so to speak, from a political standpoint. And they are also one of the largest populous areas in that particular part of England. And as such, if they were to be close, or indeed vote for Remain, then the market's already going to price in the full expectation that we will remain, because they're a stronghold to Leave. These other areas are also important. If you're looking here, Birmingham, they're due at around 4 a.m. So if it is a close run race, people are still going to be watching these local authority to local authority as they come in. And Birmingham is important because Birmingham accounts for 1.5% of all voters. And it's expected to be a very close run race as well. So that could be one of the critical ones to look out for. These other ones as well, Leeds, Glasgow, Cornwall and Sheffield, all very tight and large populous areas, so it could be key. Most marginal results, this is something we've touched upon before. This is where essentially they're seen as a dead heat. Now, in a general election, you would call these swing seats. I mean, that doesn't really exist for a referendum. It's more a bellwether seat, if you like. But if these start to stack up in a trend of leaning one way to Leave or to Remain, that's certainly going to give you a clue then if they start to cumulatively stack up in one direction. So they're key to watch. And then you've got the strongholds. Again, with strongholds like with with Sunderland, with the Remain strongholds, if any of these were to move to Leave, then the Leave camp is pretty much assured. So City of London, Edinburgh, Cambridge, Islington, Oxford, and on the flip side, these other areas here are the opposite. So again, I'll share this link. This is going to be really important if it is close, and if we don't get this kind of movement straight after 10, if the hedge funds, ultimately, they might have done their exit polls and it could be a tight run race, then them, like everyone else, needs to wait for the local authorities to start coming in from 12:30, and then it's going to be game time between 12:30 and probably 3:30, because your peak trading time. When I come in at 6 a.m, I'm very much expecting it's a done deal. It's just which way are we? Are we up potentially 3-4% in cable, or are we down 8, 9, 10, 15% in cable? That's going to be the state of play by that time. Just did a quick poll this morning just to gauge sentiment, to see what you guys were thinking. There's only 29 votes, but still, I asked, what have you or are you going to vote today? 38% Remain, 62% Leave. That's from the online poll we've just done this morning. Now, one word of caution with that is that, as you've seen evident with all the polls that have taken place, online does tend to err on the side of Leave more than Remain, given the fact that it's anonymous and people are highly or much more inclined to be opinionated. Okay, just taking a quick look at the actual session today. You do have a couple of things. You've already had these manufacturing PMIs come out of Europe, as I said. You've got the US number as well to come out at 2:45, and you've got the weekly jobless data as well this afternoon. However, I would imagine that all of that's going to take a back seat. Potential then to still see an Ipsos Mori poll come out. I'll keep you updated on the mic if I see anything. But otherwise, have yourself a good trading day. If you're going to trade overnight or you're going to stay up, I think even if you're not trading, it will be an excellent experience for you for future trading scenarios. When you talk about trading the news and understanding price movement and how sentiment and expectation moves the market, you really need to see these things live. So I would highly recommend, if you can stick it out, then stay up late, watch it, and then stay through and trade it through the morning if you can. But all the best with it. Good luck. I hope it provides you guys with some good opportunities. I hope the prep work as well that we've done is useful. I'll put in a couple of links in the chat throughout the day. But good luck. Have a good session. Thank you.